Today we're talking about the worst things a grower can do to their greenhouse plastic. My name is Nick with Bootstrap Farmer, and today we're out here at Paris Natural Farms where yet another hoop house is going up. And before we put the plastic on, we just wanted to give you a good list of things to think about to make your greenhouse plastic last even longer. So the first thing we're going to talk about is just general carelessness. Everything is rush, rush, rush. There's things that pile up, and inherently we all get kind of lazy and complacent around the farm. So let's talk about some of the things to look out for and be mindful of. So one thing that I was guilty of one time was I had a screwdriver in my pocket and I was harvesting along the side wall and I brushed up against it and I put a hole in my plastic. Seems like a simple thing to do, but everybody sticks things in their pocket, and it just kind of happens that if something's in your pocket, you're gonna bump up against something. Which brings me to the next point is if you're driving a truck or a UTV or something around your farm and you put something longer in the truck bed and you go to back up, and the reason I bring this up is we had a customer that called a few years ago that he did the exact same thing. Forgot he had pipe in the back of his truck, was going to back up the same way he has done every single time he's ever harvested. Just this time he had a piece of plastic in. Poked a hole in it, no good. Brings us to the next point, in that if you're not used to driving a trailer around your greenhouses and you have a chore in which that happens, sometimes you forget how wide that trailer is and your turning radius, and it's very easy to clip the greenhouse. And not only is that bad for the frame, but now you have a hole in one and possibly two parts of the greenhouse. Stopping, being mindful of your surroundings and what's on you and what you're driving, good things to start with. I recall another time that customer service got a phone call and somebody's handle had broken. They got complacent, they didn't fix the handle, and they actually got locked in their hoop house. They had one door. So what had to happen? They had to cut the plastic to get to the handle to get it from the other side. So that means you're intentionally putting a hole in the plastic whenever you're not fixing things as they go. And speaking of fixing holes as you go, later on in the video, we're going to talk about some things to look out for and so those holes don't happen. When a hole happens, try to fix that as soon as possible. I know it's easy to forget things in the moment, and a day becomes a week and a week becomes a month. The next thing you know, 5 years have passed and you've got a hole that's even bigger than when it first started. Had you just taken out that repair tape, hopefully it's close by and in hand and you can just fix it as it happens. Another thing to keep in mind is the melting point of greenhouse plastic. So for those of us that are using flame weeders or anything to kind of do a non-spray weed control, getting too close to the plastic has some bad effects if you get it too close. I know a lot of times those metal shrouds get very hot, and if you accidentally bump it even just for a second, it's gonna cause a hole pretty quick. So be mindful of the flame weeders and be extra careful around the edges, both inside and outside of the hoop house. And even though there's many more things to talk about, the last thing we'll cover in this section is just the simple fact of if you have a hoe or a rake or a piece of pipe or you're working around your hoop house or especially a ladder, it's really easy to just lean it up against the hoop house, causing stress. And the one day that you lean it up and you may trip or something like that, and you actually have to put a little force on that to maybe catch yourself. I fall a lot, so I tend to say that a lot in these videos. So I just want to make sure that we're not leaning anything up against the hoop house that A, that you could forget that somebody else could run into, or B, that you're just going to inevitably wind up poking a hole in it. Just treat these sides as if they were glass and be extra careful. Next, I want to talk about why we may shy away from a wood stove. I know that a lot of people, whenever they're looking into things, maybe not from a market gardener's perspective, but from a homeowner or a homesteader situation, or if you're starting out, wood stoves tend to be a little bit more economical than the propane one behind us. But let's take a look at why you don't see that in a hoop house situation very often. Number one, and we talk about a lot on this channel, just in most of our videos, about the need for choosing the right variety for the time of year, in that we're not trying to grow tomatoes in here in the winter time. We're not trying to grow crops that are needing a lot of heat. Part of the solar gain that we get in hoop house production means that we don't have to have a heater. This one's a little bit different, and you may find yourself in this situation, is this is the propagation house and the one that they'll finish peppers off in the shoulder seasons. And so we naturally needed a propane heater for this type of situation. Let's take a look at some of the challenges you would face with a wood heater. So the first thing is the air quality that's going to come out of some of these heaters if they're not properly ventilated. And so if we think about smoke buildup and carbon building up onto the hoop house, that's not going to be good for the plastic. That's going to eventually build up in such a way that it's going to reduce the amount of limited available light that's typically found in the wintertime because the days are shorter. Number two, if something ever gets out of place or falls down or breaks, and it's going to be in the middle of the night whenever you're not around, and you have a flue or part of the stove that maybe gets too close, maybe the stove gets too hot, it's very difficult to regulate the temperature of some of these stoves, and it may get to a point where it melts the area of contact around the hoop house. So that's a fairly obvious one, but worth mentioning. And aside from greenhouse plastic and the problems that we just discussed, think about if you're going to have to feed that wood heater with wood, when you're going to have to do it at night, when it's cold. Does that mean you're going to be up all night, every night for months on end, doing very tedious labor, whenever we could just have a heater that's designed for the application? Propane, you can bring in a tank at any time and not have to mess with the wood and have even temperature fluctuation without all the worries of a wood stove. So right now I'm in between two hoop houses, and for a lot of us this is where we might tend to spray a little bit. And depending on what kind of herbicides or possibly even pest control, sometimes there's solvents within those chemicals that don't necessarily react well to the polyethylene film that greenhouses are made out of. It also may hinder the anti-dust or anti-condensation portion of your greenhouse plastic, because we don't necessarily know what you're spraying, what you're mixing it with. So the point is if you're using a sprayer around greenhouse plastic, having a partner with a shield or a piece of tin, and I'm talking about like one of those big paint shields, might be a good idea to, if you're having to spray close. Of course you don't want to do it on a windy day where you're going to get that drift, but making sure that those chemicals don't hit the plastic is always a good idea. Up next is not properly installing your greenhouse plastic. Now, if you're my age and older, and we're not going to discuss what year that happened, is the traditional way of thinking about things is maybe board and batten type situations like you see in these pictures, in which a board is attached and sandwiches the plastic in between another board with screws or nails. But here's the thing about that. It's very hard to get that adjusted right correctly the first time by the time you deal with the arches and the straights and the up and downs of everything, and the plastic tends to get off kilter real quick, starts causing seams and creases. The other thing is, if you're the type of grower, and I'm looking at the ornamental folks in this one, in which you're changing the plastic depending on the season, you can't easily take off the plastic. Maybe you're in a southern climate in which you're just going to do a shade house in the summer. There's all kinds of different reasons. Number one, the cost of lumber these days actually means that the aluminum lock channel is far more price effective than board and batten. And I think a lot of times, especially in the very beginning, farmers tend to look at things like, well, I'll just go down, I'll get it local, I'll save some money and just use a piece of wood because I can get a furring strip. Well, not all lumber is created equal. And so if you go the less expensive route and maybe just use a piece of number 2 pine or possibly even a number 3 pine, that pine is going to rot out. But if you use cedar, now the cost per square foot, even with the spring wire, is vastly more costly. So do it right, do it once, have a nice, evenly secured, fully even amount of pressure along every single exposed edge, versus the board and batten, in which you can lose pressure if a nail comes loose or a screw comes loose, or you have a situation with that rotted wood. And if you take a look at some of these pictures, you look at all of the holes that are put in the plastic, which may, over the course of the seasons changing and heating and expanding, cause a rip that you do have to do repair later on anyway. And speaking of repairs, we put out a video a few months ago about how to repair a big hole in the plastic. As you can see, it's still holding tight many months later. And again, if you have these holes, take care of them now, take care of them properly, and that way you don't ever have to worry about it again, and it's going to last you season after season. A lot of times we make these videos and we say things that maybe you haven't heard of, or be like, why are they even bringing this up? A lot of the things come directly from the customer service calls I overhear at my desk throughout the day. Just 2 weeks ago, we had somebody call in and they were having troubles with their greenhouse. We asked them to send pictures in so we could help diagnose. We weren't getting the full story. Come to find out, they were installing their hoop house not with lock channel, not with board and batten, but they decided to use repair tape to attach it to the hoop house. A couple of things with that. Number one, that's not what the repair tape was designed for. Number two, the adhesive that that repair tape is made of is specifically designed to adhere to the polyethylene, not to metal, not to wood. So of course, things didn't go well and she had to call and get a piece of replacement that was not covered under warranty because it was not installed properly. I put this out there as a cautionary tale of a real world example that is super fresh, in that don't install plastic with repair tape. They're made to fix the holes. just like the one behind me that we talked about earlier. Next on the list, we're going to talk about making sure that livestock is not in or around the hoop house. Just look at this guy. Do you think this steer cares about where his horns are going to be or what he's going to run into? I know that's an extreme example. We're in Texas, that's what we have around here. And what else we have around here is fences. Now I know a lot of the times when I travel around the country, fences sometimes are less common than what we have here. We're in cattle country, cows get out, it's a way of life, but what we don't want to have happen is a cow or a goat or an ostrich or a llama or a lamb or an elephant or a giraffe or a lion or a tiger. Sorry about that, I got out of hand. The point is, we don't want any type of animal getting in and destroying the crops, and especially destroying the plastic. Again, the whole point of this video is to take that investment into the plastic and into the labor that you have putting it out and making sure it lasts the full 8 to 9, 10 seasons that you typically can get in a market garden situation. Next up, I want to say something controversial that some of you may not like, and I apologize for even bringing it up. And I don't want to hurt your feelings here, but that's the use of cattle panels for your greenhouse. And I know that it's very economical. I know it's super easy and super cheap to put up, but here's what I want you to think about. In the context of this video, in how we're trying to protect and not misuse greenhouse plastic, I want you to think about everything involved with that type of scenario. Number one, it's super flexible, and in the wind and in the rain and any storm, it's rubbing up against the plastic. And if you have this greenhouse plastic on a cattle panel right now, stop the video, go outside and take a look, and what you see is this little strip of abrasion that you have on the greenhouse plastic. And that does two things. A, it prematurely wears out the plastic, and that gives that friction point. And B, over time, and I know it doesn't seem like a big deal, but when a bit of available daylight, especially this time of year, I keep bringing that up, is very important for the plant's photosynthesis. We don't want to restrict any daylight coming in. So the reason you take a look at a greenhouse with all the bows in between is because it gives a nice big bay gap window all day long in which the light is not restricted. So between the flexibility, which I know is a big selling point to cattle panel greenhouses, and the economics, which is even the bigger selling point, you're actually not getting the full economics. And I know some of you may comment down below that, hey, I've had this up for 10 years and it works fine, and that's great. All I'm saying is in this video, we're doing best case scenarios to make this plastic last the very best it can be. Okay, behind me is a lot of real estate that needs to be maintained throughout the season. And earlier we talked about sometimes there's things that causes holes in the plastic. And of course we're talking about lawnmowers, trimmers. Anytime a metal blade is swirling about and throwing branches and rocks and debris that can bounce off, hit, and penetrate the plastic, we may be faced with things that don't take the guard off of those pieces of equipment, don't mow into the plastic, always try to mow away from it, even if you have to make a couple of extra passes. So just knowing that, hey, this land has to be maintained, it helps cut down on the pests, it helps cut down on the snakes, it helps cut down on transferring some of the pest problems as it has places to hide. So we want to keep the weeds down, we want to keep the seeds from forming, but as we do so, we also want to make sure that we're protecting the plastic by being careful with those pieces of equipment the closer we get to it. All right, so next up is a training issue in which sometimes we may find, in this case, the roll-up sides have been rolled up improperly. So just imagine if it rained, water hits the plastic, it rolls down, and it's catching all of this pocket inside of this roll-up side. And what does that do? It fills up this cavity with water. Every gallon is 8 pounds, and we're adding hundreds of pounds of pressure to this roll-up side, which is not great for the roll-up side, and it's especially not great for the greenhouse plastic. So let's take a look on how to quickly remedy this situation and how to roll up the plastic correctly. So you can see as I'm rolling down, it's already leaking a bunch of water, and that's exactly what happens whenever we catch the water when we roll this up backwards. So all we have to do to remedy this situation is you can pick up the handle, you pull it up, and you roll it what seems to be backwards. But what that allows is the plastic to roll inside of itself, so when the water comes down, it just falls straight through and not in that pocket that we showed you a second ago. So the final topic is for all you dirty birdies out there, and I'm just right in the same boat with you. So not planning to clean the plastic or at least do a little bit of scrubbing before the season. Now, this is the end of the summer season, and I say before is because even though it's at the end of the season, we're getting ready for the winter crops. And again, I bring it up, the available daylight that's going to be restricted as the winter months come on. So we want to give the greenhouse plastic all of the benefit of diffusing without restricting the light. And so what we have to consider is, as the course of the year goes on, we're coming out of summer, we're coming out of some winter storms, we're coming out of some summer storms, we're coming out of some droughts, and as the wind picks up, it naturally deposits dust. Think about your house. You're inside, and you should be, maybe hopefully, or at least you're hearing about it, that you need to probably dust some things around the house. That dust is settling on the inside. Just think about all the dust that's settling on the outside. So as these storms come through, it's constantly dropping those fine particulates that, as the wind is coming and as the humidity is changing, static electricity naturally cleans. Even if you have the anti-dust version of the plastic, you're still prone to a little bit of coverage. And so the other thing that happens, especially in a real wet season, maybe you have a lot of traffic, is mud and debris splashing about the sides of the plastic. Again, we have to clean this thing going into, and I want you to use that framework, going into the beginning of the season. So how do we clean greenhouse plastic? You have to pick the right day, and it's the same type of day that you would installing the plastic. A nice, calm day, no wind, hopefully the sun out, because as soon as we get this thing wet, we do want that to dry out pretty quickly so it doesn't form spots. Now, I would like for you to take your garden hose, and hopefully you have enough pressure, and if you don't, use something like a brass nozzle, or not a pressure washer per se, but you do want to restrict the water flow with some type of neck down device so you can get that pressure up and over the hoop house and to give it a nice rinse. So you're basically just taking the dust and washing it off real quick. Next is, hopefully you have that same painter's pole that you use to poke the plastic up during the installation. You can take that threaded grip, and there's plenty of adapters out there for different cleaning. I suggest a microfiber, like mop, real soft type of thing, and just to do a gentle scrub. And all we're doing is taking the remainder of the dust that didn't come off during the initial rinse and just giving a little bit of motivation to get off and come on down. During that process, you may want to use a very mild, like a Dawn dishwasher diluted situation, in which we're just putting a little tiny bit of bubbles on there just to help lubricate the dust and get it off. And again, you can do that with the scrubber, and then just give it a final rinse. You don't have to squeegee it dry or towel dry it or anything like that. That's why we chose the nice warm day. Now, this is at the shoulder season, and we're going into the winter time. So as long as the sun is out, you should be just fine. I wouldn't worry about the temperature too much. Just try to avoid days where you think it might freeze. So thanks for watching this video. As we're fixing to put the plastic on, I hope that the builders of this hoop house keep all this in mind. I hope that if you're fixing to build yours or you need to maintain yours, you learn something that can help extend the life of the plastic. Look, we're a company that sells this stuff, and of course we want to sell plastic, but we don't want you to have to buy something twice. We want you to buy it right the first time. We want you to use it correctly and get all the life expectancy out of it, because we know that your farm should be growing and that you may need other things that we can provide for you to help make more money. So anytime we do a video like this, it's to help extend the life of the products and to make your farm more efficient. So if you can think of anything that we forgot to mention in this video, it's hard to think of it all, please comment in the link below, subscribe while you're down there, and we'll see you in the next video. Have a great season.